You are scribe medici Thaddeus Valk, and the parchment in your augmetic fingers carries the weight of damnation. The sanctified vellum, made from the processed skin of loyal imperial citizens, as all official documents are, trembles as servomotors in your cybernetic hand struggle to compensate for what your organic nervous system refuses to accept. The imperial Gothic script burns into your vision. Emergency Biological Material Procurement Priority, ULTIMA. Your Medici facility on Hive World Tertius has received these requisition orders for 43 years. Usually, they're routine. Request 10,000 units processed dermis grade alpha, purpose, servitor maintenance. Or perhaps request 50 units synthetic flesh composite, purpose, Astartes surgical intervention. The numbers always balanced. Supply always met demand. The great fleshworks of the Imperium always provided. Not today. You read the document again, hoping your organic eye has failed, that age has finally claimed your ability to process high Gothic numerals. But the augmetic lens integrated into your left socket confirms what your heart refuses to believe. The number stares back at you with digital precision. 0. 0 units available. 0 units in transit. 0 units projected for the next solar month. The requisition seal bears the mark of the Departamento Biologicus, that vast bureaucratic machine responsible for managing the Imperium's most essential resource. Below it, a secondary seal you've never seen before, the Crimson Death's head of the Adeptus Biologicus Emergency Protocol Division. You didn't know such a division existed until this moment. Your augmetic fingers trace the parchment's edge, feeling the familiar texture of processed human skin beneath synthetic preservatives. How many loyal citizens contributed to this single document? 10. 20. The irony tastes like copper in your mouth. A document announcing the end of human biological material, written on human biological material. The facility around you hums with its usual efficiency. In Laboratory Complex 7, Tech Adept Zarian continues her morning ritual of preparing bioneural interfaces for the day's servitor production. She doesn't know yet. The pneumatic tubes that carry requisition orders throughout the facility whisper their mechanical prayers, delivering identical documents to every department head, every Medici supervisor, every fleshwright and bioartifacts who keeps this place functioning. You imagine their faces as they read. Dr. Helena Voss in the trauma ward, her weathered features cracking as she realizes she can no longer save the burn victims from yesterday's plasma containment failure. Tech Priest Corvin in the servitor foundries, his optical mechadendrites focusing and refocusing on numbers that refuse to change. Chirurgeon Prime Thaddeus in the Astartes medical bay, calculating how many space marines will die from wounds that should have been routine to treat. The document continues. You force yourself to read past the immediate horror to the administrative meat of the crisis. The statistics unfold like a slow-motion disaster. Sector-wide biological material reserves, critical. Subsector processing facilities, 78% non-operational. Expected facility closure timeline, 2-3 standard months. 2 months. In 2 months, when the flesh runs out completely, this facility will join the growing list of imperial medical installations forced to return to the barbarism of the pre-age of strife. You've read about those times in restricted historical texts, surgeons working with crude metals and synthetic polymers, patients dying from treatable conditions because they lacked the biocompatibility that only processed human tissue could provide. Your Voxcaster crackles to life. Scribe Medici Valk to Administrative Council Chambers. Priority, immediate. The mechanical voice carries an undertone you've never heard before, not quite fear, but the administrative equivalent. Uncertainty, bureaucratic panic. You walk through corridors lined with bioprocessing units, their transparent cases revealing the steady cultivation of synthetic flesh composites. Each unit represents decades of imperial technological development, the marriage of human biology and sacred machinery that allows the Imperium to maintain its vast populations. The irony strikes you again. These machines, designed to create artificial biological material, still require base human tissue to function properly. Without it, they're just expensive monuments to humanity's hubris. The administrative council chambers occupy the facility's highest spire, their armored glass windows offering a panoramic view of Tertius's primary hive city. 17 billion souls live in those towering structures, each one dependent on the medical infrastructure you help maintain. 17 billion people who don't yet know that their safety net has just disintegrated. Council Medici Vex stands at the central podium, her scarred face illuminated by the hololithic display showing sector-wide facility status. Red markers dominate the display, facility after facility reporting critical shortages or complete cessation of operations. She doesn't look up as you enter. "Scribe Volk," she says, her voice carrying the weight of someone who has just learned that everything they've dedicated their life to is ending. "You've seen the requisition reports. I need you to calculate our facility's operational timeline based on current reserves." You access your data slate, fingers moving automatically through calculations you've performed thousands of times before. But this time, the numbers trend toward zero. 18 days for critical operations, 42 days for complete cessation, Council Medici. 18 days, she repeats, as if saying it aloud might change the mathematics. 18 days before we can no longer maintain life support for our critical patients. 18 days before the servitor maintenance protocols fail, and we lose our automated systems. Through the chamber's windows, you can see the vast industrial complexes that ring the hive city. Factories, processing plants, transportation networks, all dependent on servitor labor, all requiring the biomechanical interfaces that your facility produces. You realize with growing horror that this isn't just a medical crisis. This is the beginning of civilization's collapse. "Council Medici," you find yourself saying. The requisition document mentions sector-wide shortages. This isn't just our facility. This isn't just our world. Her eyes meet yours, and in them you see the reflection of a galaxy-spanning catastrophe. "No, Scribe Volk. This is every facility, every world, every human settlement from the Eye of Terror to the Eastern Fringe. The Imperium of man is running out of flesh." The words hang in the recycled air like a death sentence. Somewhere in the facility below, machines continue their work, processing the last reserves of humanity's most essential resource. In 42 days, those machines will fall silent, and then humanity will learn what it truly means to survive in the grim darkness of the far future, without the biological infrastructure that has kept them alive for 10,000 years. You look down at the requisition order still clutched in your augmetic hand, its human skin parchment suddenly feeling like a relic from a lost age. Tomorrow, there will be no more such documents. Tomorrow, the Imperium begins to die from the inside out, one untreatable wound at a time. To understand the horror of running out, you must first comprehend how deeply human skin has been woven into the very fabric of imperial civilization. This is not merely about medical procedures. This is about the technological dependence that defines humanity's darkest future. You find yourself descending into processing level Gamma 7, the deepest accessible section of the biofacility where the real work happens. Tech Adept Zarian escorts you, her mechanical limbs clicking against the metal grating as she explains what most imperial citizens never see, never know, and pray they never need. The Imperium processes approximately 47 billion human corpses annually. She states with the clinical detachment that only a servant of the Omnissiah can achieve. Each corpse yields an average of 1/8 square meters of usable biological material after proper consecration and preparation. This supplies the medical, mechanical, and military infrastructure of approximately 10,000 worlds. The numbers are staggering, but numbers alone cannot convey the reality of what you witness as the heavy blast doors seal behind you. The processing floor stretches beyond the horizon of your vision, a cathedral of flesh and machinery, where the dead serve the living in ways that would have horrified the ancients. Conveyor systems transport bodies in various stages of preparation, each one tagged with ritual purity seals and bureaucratic identification markers. You recognize the uniforms: Imperial Guard casualties from the Damocles Gulf campaigns, civilian casualties from the Tau expansion conflicts, workers who died in industrial accidents across a dozen forge worlds. All of them finding new purpose in death, their flesh becoming the raw material that keeps humanity's technological civilization functioning. Observe, Zarian instructs, directing your attention to a processing station where servoskulls work with microscopic precision. Human skin possesses unique bioelectrical properties that cannot be artificially replicated. The neural pathways remain partially active even after death, allowing for seamless integration with Imperial technology. Synthetic alternatives create rejection responses in 89.7% of cases. You watch as sheets of processed skin are prepared for different applications. Some will become bio-neural interfaces for servitor production, the connective tissue that allows lobotomized humans to merge successfully with mechanical components. Others will be crafted into surgical grafts, their cellular structure modified to accept genetic material from any Imperial citizen, making them universal healing matrices. A section of the facility houses what tech adept Zarian calls the Astartes production line. Here, specially prepared biological materials undergo additional consecration rituals before being shipped to Space Marine recruitment worlds. You learn that creating a single Space Marine requires biological material harvested from approximately 47 deceased Imperial citizens, their processed flesh becoming part of the surgical procedures that transform human adolescents into the Emperor's angels of death. The most critical applications, Zarian continues, leading you to a heavily secured section requiring additional clearance, involve Navigator bioenhancement and Titan crew neural integration. Navigator houses require specialized flesh grafts that maintain their psychic abilities across generations. Without these biological materials, their warp site degrades within standard months. The Titan crew preparation chambers reveal another layer of humanity's technological dependence. The massive war machines that stride across battlefields throughout the galaxy require crews whose nervous systems have been modified with biological interfaces. You observe preparation tables where specialized technicians craft neural connectors from processed human tissue, connectors that will allow ordinary humans to mentally interface with god machines weighing millions of tons. Each Titan requires biological material from approximately 300 deceased Imperial citizens. Zarian explains as you watch servoskulls carefully preparing neural interface components. The Collegia Titanica operates 847 active Titan legions across the galaxy. The mathematical implications are significant. But the true scope of the Imperium's biological dependence becomes clear as you tour the civilian medical production sections. Here, you discover that virtually every advanced medical procedure relies on processed human biological material. Organ transplants, burn treatments, genetic therapy, surgical reconstruction, all dependent on the cellular matrices that only human skin can provide. Imperial Guard medical protocols alone, Zarian states, accessing data from her cogitator implants, require processed biological material equivalent to approximately 12 million deceased citizens annually. This maintains combat effectiveness for our military forces across active war zones. The facility's records reveal the vast network of collection and processing that spans the galaxy. Battlefield casualty collection ships follow Imperial Guard and Space Marine forces, gathering the dead for processing. Civilian mortality processing centers operate on every major world, turning natural deaths into medical resources. Even the criminal justice system contributes. executed heretics and criminals providing material for the continuation of Imperial civilization. You begin to understand the logistics that most Imperial citizens never consider. When a hive worker dies in an industrial accident on Armageddon, their processed remains might become neural interfaces for servitors on Mars. When Imperial guardsmen fall defending Cadia, their flesh might save space marines wounded in battles on worlds they've never heard of. Death and life intertwine across the galaxy in ways that would seem impossible to comprehend, if not for the vast bureaucratic machinery that makes it routine. The Adeptus Mechanicus estimates, Zarian concludes as you return to the facility's upper levels, that complete cessation of biological material harvesting would result in 34% military effectiveness reduction within 1 standard year, 67% medical capability loss within 6 standard months, and complete servitor production failure within 4 standard months. As you process this information, the true horror becomes clear. This isn't just about medical procedures or military effectiveness. This is about the fundamental infrastructure that allows Imperial civilization to function. Without processed human flesh, the Imperium's technology simply stops working. The galaxy's most advanced civilization is, quite literally, built on the flesh of its dead. And now, for the first time in 10 millennia, that flesh is running out. The implications ripple through your consciousness like shock waves. Every Imperial Guard regiment, every Space Marine chapter, every Forge world and Hive city depends on this continuous flow of processed biological material. The Imperium has created a system so dependent on human flesh that stopping the supply doesn't just cause medical problems, it causes civilizational collapse. You realize that you're not just witnessing the end of medical procedures. You're witnessing the beginning of the end of humanity's technological civilization itself. On Forge World Metalica, Tech Priest Dominus Kithon 7 experiences his first moment of genuine emotion in 3 centuries as his servitor production lines grind to a halt. The sensation is so alien after decades of emotional suppression that his threat assessment protocols activate, flooding his augmented nervous system with warning signals that something fundamental has gone wrong. You stand beside him in the primary servitor foundry, watching as the last functional bioneural interface rolls off the production line. The sight should fill you with the mechanical satisfaction that drives all servants of the Omnissiah, but instead, you feel something that your emotion-suppressant implants struggle to categorize. The closest analog in your memory banks is the sensation organic humans call dread. Production capability, 0%, Kithon 7 states, his Vox grill crackling with static that betrays the stress his mechanical form should not be able to experience. Current servitor maintenance requirements, 847,000 units per solar cycle. Available biological materials for maintenance, 0 units. The servitor foundry stretches across 17 square kilometers of sacred Martian soil, its production bays capable of creating thousands of lobotomized cyborg workers daily. Now those bays stand empty, their biomechanical assembly stations waiting for raw materials that will never arrive. The silence is profound, 10,000 years of continuous production ending not with explosion or conquest, but with simple scarcity. You observe Servitor Unit 7745 Gamma as it attempts to perform routine maintenance on a damaged companion. The unit's mechanical limbs work with programmed precision, but without replacement bioneural interfaces, it can only patch synthetic components. The damaged servitor's biological elements continue to deteriorate, its flesh rotting while its mechanical parts function normally. The smell of decay mingles with sacred machine oils in a combination that your olfactory sensors flag as unholy. The estimated operational lifespan for current servitor population, Kithon 7 continues, his optical mechadendrites focusing on statistical projections that grow worse by the hour, ranges from 14 solar days for heavy industrial units to 86 solar days for light maintenance servitors. Beyond those parameters, critical infrastructure failure becomes inevitable. The implications cascade through your processing centers like a virus consuming data. Servitors maintain the life support systems for 17 billion citizens across Metallica's forge complexes. They operate the manufacturing lines that produce lasguns for the Imperial Guard, ammunition for Space Marine chapters, and mechanical components for the entire Segmentum Solar. They pilot the cargo haulers that transport materials between worlds, maintain the Vox networks that enable interstellar communication, and perform the countless tasks too dangerous or tedious for human workers. Without them, Forge World Metallica will cease to function within 3 standard months. You accompany Chthon 7 to Production Bay Tertius, where desperate measures are already being implemented. Tech adepts work frantically to develop synthetic alternatives to human biological material. Their mechadendrite appendages interfacing directly with cogitator banks that calculate millions of potential solutions per second. Synthetic alternative success rate, announces tech adept Corvin, her voice distorted by the emotional stress that even her augmented physiology cannot entirely suppress, currently stands at 27%. Rejection responses include neural cascade failure, biological tissue necrosis, and mechanical component incompatibility. You witness the testing of these alternatives firsthand. Servitor Unit 3312 Delta receives experimental synthetic bioneural interfaces designed to replace its failing organic components. For 14 minutes, the procedure appears successful. The servitor responds to commands, performs basic tasks, and shows no signs of rejection. Then the screaming begins. The synthetic interfaces trigger an immune response that the servitor's lobotomized brain cannot process or suppress. Its organic components reject the artificial biological material with such violence that its mechanical restraints cannot contain the convulsions. You watch in horror as a being designed to feel no pain experiences agony so intense that it overrides decades of surgical modifications meant to prevent exactly this response. Tech adept Corvin deactivates the servitor with a single mechadendrite insertion, but the sound of its screams continues to echo through the production bay long after its vocal cords fall silent. Chthon 7 emotional suppressants finally identify the sensation you're experiencing. It is fear. Alternative solution pathways, Chthon 7 states, his voice carrying harmonics that suggest internal system strain, require utilization of living subjects for bioneural interface production. The words hang in the recycled air like a death sentence. You access the implications through your cogitator implants and immediately wish you hadn't. Living subjects, not the blessed dead whose flesh serves the Imperium in death, but living, breathing, thinking human beings converted directly into servitor components while still alive. The first volunteers arrive within 6 solar hours. They come from the under-hive levels where imperial authority is weakest, where desperate citizens will accept any alternative to starvation or gang violence. The Adeptus Mechanicus promises food, shelter, and purpose in service to the Omnissiah. They don't explain that the service will be posthumous, or that posthumous is a relative term when dealing with biomechanical integration. You observe the first living conversion in Production Bay Alpha with the clinical detachment that your augmented nervous system demands, but something organic in your partially human consciousness rebels against what you witness. The subject, a young woman whose identification marker lists her as Underhive Resident 7745 Kappa, remains conscious throughout the bioneural interface installation process. Consciousness retention improves biocompatibility by 47%, Tech Adept Corvin explains, as servoskulls perform the delicate surgery that will transform a human being into a servitor component. Lobotomization can be performed post-installation to ensure compliance. The woman's eyes track movement throughout the procedure, her pupils dilating with each surgical incision. You realize she understands what's happening to her, understands that she's being transformed into a living machine, but the paralytic agents prevent her from expressing anything beyond the terror that fills her gaze. When the process completes, Servitor Unit 7745 Kappa performs flawlessly. Her biological components integrate seamlessly with mechanical systems, her neural pathways accepting commands with 99.7% efficiency. She shows no signs of rejection, no immune response, no biological failure. But behind her lobotomized eyes, something still watches, something still aware, still trapped inside a body that no longer belongs to her, still conscious of what she has become. Production efficiency. Kython 7 announces with satisfaction that his emotion suppressants can no longer entirely contain, has been restored to acceptable parameters. Recommended expansion of living subject acquisition to meet sector-wide demands. Within one standard month, Forge World Metallica is processing 3,000 living subjects daily. The underhives empty as desperate citizens accept conversion rather than starvation. Then the mid-hive volunteers begin arriving, workers who have lost their jobs to servitor failures, families who cannot afford food in the economic collapse that follows infrastructure breakdown. You realize that the Imperium has crossed a line that even 10,000 years of Grimdark existence had never approached. They are not just using the dead to maintain their civilization. They are creating the dead, transforming the living directly into the biological components their technology requires. Standing in Production Bay Omega, watching the endless stream of living subjects being converted into servitor components, you finally understand what the flesh crisis truly means. It's not just the end of medical procedures or military effectiveness. It's the moment when humanity's technological civilization becomes so desperate to survive that it begins consuming itself, literally converting living human beings into the biological materials needed to continue functioning. The servitor factories are no longer silent. They hum with renewed efficiency, processing thousands of living subjects daily, their production lines running at maximum capacity. The only difference is that now, the screams have been replaced by the mechanical efficiency of lobotomized compliance. But late at night, when the production shifts change and the factories momentarily quiet, you sometimes think you can still hear the screaming. Not from the new servitors, whose lobotomized brains can no longer produce such responses, but from somewhere deeper, from the organic components of your own augmented consciousness, rebelling against what you have witnessed, what you have enabled, what you have become. The Omnissiah provides, but the price of that provision has just become the consumption of humanity itself. You are Chief Chirurgeon Helena Voss aboard the battleship Indomitable Fury, and the Vox transmission you've just received carries the weight of 10,000 years of medical tradition ending in a single, sterile sentence. Final biological material shipment complete. No further resupply authorized. Emperor preserve us all. The medical bay around you represents the pinnacle of Imperial healing arts, bioreconstruction chambers capable of rebuilding space marines from near death, surgical suites equipped with the finest servoskull assistance, and storage units containing enough processed biological material to treat an entire crusade's worth of casualties. Or rather, it contained enough. Past tense. The storage monitoring systems now display nothing but zeros across 17 different categories of essential medical supplies. In 3 months, when the Astartes return from the Ghoul Stars campaign, you'll have nothing to treat their wounds with except prayer, and whatever primitive surgical techniques you can remember from your earliest training, before the Imperium's biomedical miracles made such barbarism unnecessary. The irony cuts deeper than any surgical blade. You've spent 40 years perfecting the art of Imperial medicine, learning to graft processed human skin with cellular precision, to integrate bioneural matrices with damaged nervous systems, to rebuild organs using biological scaffolding harvested from loyal Imperial dead. Your hands can perform miracles that would seem like sorcery to the ancient peoples of old Earth. Now, those same hands will return to working with metal sutures and synthetic bandages like a primitive savage. Medici Tertius, Corvin enters your office carrying the supply inventory you requested, his weathered face bearing the expression of a man who has just counted his remaining days. "Chief Chirurgeon," he says, setting the data slate before you with hands that shake despite decades of surgical precision. "We have sufficient bioneural interface material for 14 more servitor maintenance procedures, enough processed skin grafts for 7 space marine reconstruction surgeries, and biocompatible organ matrices for 3 complete organ replacements. 24 procedures. 24 chances to save lives before Imperial medicine reverts to the barbarism of the dark age of technology. You access the casualty projections for the returning Astartes forces and feel something cold settle in your augmented stomach. The Ghoul Stars campaign has been brutal. Estimates suggest 67% casualty rates among the participating chapters, with combat injuries ranging from plasma burns that require extensive skin grafts to neurological damage that demands bioneural reconstruction. Under normal circumstances, such wounds would be routine to treat. Without biological materials, they become death sentences. Show me the priority protocols, you instruct, though you already know what the documents will contain. The Departamento Medici has spent millennia preparing for every conceivable medical emergency, except this one. There are protocols for treating chaos corruption, procedures for handling Xeno's biological weapons, guidelines for operating during warp storms that cut off supply lines for years. But there are no protocols for operating without the processed human flesh that makes Imperial medicine possible. Corvin activates the hololithic display, revealing the brutal mathematics of medical triage without adequate supplies. Priority 1, Space Marine Chapter Masters and Captains. Priority 2, Critical Imperial Guard Command Staff. Priority 3, Essential Technical Personnel. Priority 4. He pauses, his voice carrying the weight of moral compromise. Priority 4. All remaining personnel to receive standard field treatment only. Standard field treatment. Cauterization with heated metal. Amputation without reconstruction. Bandages that provide protection but no healing enhancement. Pain suppression using synthetic chemicals that often cause more damage than the original wounds. The medical techniques that humanity abandoned when they learned to process the dead into healing miracles. You walk through the medical bay, observing patients who represent the last cases you'll be able to treat properly. In Bioreconstruction Chamber 7, Battle Brother Maximilian of the Imperial Fists undergoes skin grafting to repair plasma burns across 34% of his body surface. The processed human skin integrates seamlessly with his enhanced physiology, his Astartes healing factor working in harmony with Imperial biotechnology to restore combat effectiveness within 72 hours. Next month, a space marine with identical injuries will die slowly and agonizingly, because you'll have nothing to offer except synthetic bandages and prayer. In Neural Integration Suite 4, Sergeant Corvanis receives bioneural interface reconstruction to repair combat damage to his spinal column. Servoskulls work with microscopic precision, weaving processed human nervous tissue through his enhanced biology to restore full motor function. The procedure represents 800 years of accumulated medical knowledge and the biological material harvested from 47 loyal Imperial citizens. Next month, a similar injury will result in permanent paralysis and eventual discharge from active service, if the patient survives the primitive surgical intervention at all. The psychological impact on your medical staff becomes apparent as the reality of the situation settles into their consciousness. Medici Prime Thaddeus requests reassignment to a supply depot position, unable to face the prospect of watching patients die from treatable conditions. Junior Chirurgeon Vex suffers what the psychological evaluation protocols classify as acute medical helplessness syndrome, a condition previously unknown in Imperial medical personnel who had never faced the prospect of being unable to heal. Chief Chirurgeon, Corvin says as you complete your inspection, the junior medici are requesting access to the restricted archives. They want to study pre-imperial surgical techniques. Pre-imperial surgical techniques. The brutal, primitive methods that humanity used before learning to process their dead into medical miracles. Procedures with mortality rates exceeding 40% for routine operations. Surgery performed with metal instruments that caused massive tissue damage. Healing times measured in months rather than days. The medical dark age that the Imperium thought it had permanently left behind. You authorize the request, knowing that your staff will soon be performing surgery that would horrify their predecessors from just months ago. The irony is perfect in its grimness. The galaxy's most advanced medical personnel preparing to practice medicine like barbarians, because their civilization has consumed the biological foundation that made their miracles possible. The first casualties begin arriving 2 weeks later. Imperial Guard forces from the Mordian campaign return with injuries that should be routine to treat. Plasma burns, shrapnel wounds, biological weapon exposure that requires cellular reconstruction. You watch your staff attempt to treat conditions that require processed human skin with synthetic alternatives that the patient's immune systems reject violently. Guardsman Vex develops massive infections from synthetic skin grafts that his body cannot integrate. You watch him die over 17 agonizing days, his wounds festering despite every antibiotic and antiseptic treatment available. 3 months ago, processed human skin would have saved his life within 72 hours. Colonel Thane requires neural reconstruction after combat damage severs his spinal column. Without bio-neural interfaces created from processed human nervous tissue, the surgery fails catastrophically. He survives the procedure but remains permanently paralyzed, his military career ended by injuries that Imperial medicine could have repaired completely. The worst cases involve the psychological casualties, soldiers whose minds have been damaged by chaos exposure or Xeno's biological weapons. These conditions require bio-neural matrix reconstruction using processed human brain tissue to rebuild damaged neural pathways. Without these materials, you can only offer chemical sedation and permanent internment in psychiatric facilities. Chief Chirurgeon, Medici Tertius Corvin reports during your weekly casualty review, "We've lost 17 patients this week to conditions that would have been completely treatable under normal supply conditions." Medical effectiveness has declined by 78% compared to pre-crisis standards. 78%. The number burns into your consciousness like a brand. You're watching the accumulated medical knowledge of 10 millennia become useless, because the biological foundation that made it possible no longer exists. But the true horror becomes apparent when you receive the next Vox transmission from Departamento Medici Command. The message is brief, clinical, and apocalyptic in its implications. All medical facilities are hereby authorized to implement Emergency Protocol Omega-7. Begin immediate harvesting of biological materials from terminal patients to maintain critical supply reserves. Emergency Protocol Omega-7. You access the restricted medical archives and discover protocols that make you question everything you've dedicated your life to achieving. Harvesting biological materials from dying patients. Accelerating terminal cases to maximize tissue recovery. Converting medical facilities from places of healing into processing centers that consume the dying to treat the living. The Imperium's medical establishment has just authorized turning its hospitals into cannibalistic processing facilities that devour the sick to sustain themselves. Standing in your medical bay, surrounded by the sophisticated equipment that will soon become useless decoration, you realize that the flesh crisis has forced Imperial medicine to cross a moral boundary that even 10,000 years of Grimdark existence had never approached. You're not just losing the ability to heal. You're being ordered to harvest your own patience to maintain the pretense of medical capability. In 3 days, when the first terminal patient reaches the criteria for Emergency Protocol Omega-7, you'll have to decide whether to remain a healer or become something else entirely. The choice represents everything wrong with the Imperium's dependence on processed human flesh. When the supply runs out, they don't accept the limitations. They create new sources by consuming themselves. The age of imperial medical miracles is ending not with noble sacrifice, but with the transformation of healers into harvesters of human flesh. Navigator Primaris Octavia Castellan of House Benetech awakens in her ancestral chambers aboard the flagship Eternal Venture to discover that her third eye, the sacred organ that has guided humanity through the warp for 10 millennia, is weeping tears of blood. Not metaphorical blood, not the crimson of her house colors, but actual blood seeping from the psychic organ that defines her existence and enables humanity's survival among the stars. You feel what she feels as consciousness returns, the disorientation of waking up partially blind in a universe that has depended on your sight for its continued existence. Your fingers, her fingers, trace the moisture trickling from the pineal eye embedded in your forehead, and your enhanced nervous system identifies the taste immediately. Iron, copper, the metallic tang of biological failure. The sacred flesh grafts that maintain Navigator physiology have not been renewed in 8 standard months. Your private chambers reflect 10,000 years of accumulated wealth and power, relics from the Great Crusade, hololiths of Navigator ancestors who guided the Emperor himself through the treacherous currents of the warp, ceremonial robes, woven from materials that exist nowhere else in the galaxy. All of it meaningless now that your ability to perceive the warp is deteriorating at a rate that your House Medici describe as catastrophic but manageable. Manageable, the euphemism tastes like ash in your mouth. Navigator Primaris, your personal Medici announces as he enters with the daily biostatus report you've come to dread. The cellular degradation has accelerated. Without fresh biological material for the flesh grafts, we estimate complete psychic blindness within 4 standard months. 4 months. 4 months before the warp becomes invisible to you, before the cosmic currents that you've navigated since childhood become as unreachable as the surface of a distant star. 4 months before House Benetech loses its Primaris Navigator, and with her, the accumulated psychic knowledge of 300 generations. You access the house records through your personal cogitator, reviewing the bioenhancement protocols that have sustained your bloodline since before the founding of the Imperium. The flesh grafts require biological material harvested from psychically sensitive humans, not the standard processed skin used for common medical procedures, but specialized neural tissue from individuals who possessed at least minimal psychic potential before death. Such material has always been rare. Psykers are too valuable to waste on biological processing. They're living minds needed for astropathic communication, sanctioned support duties, or sacrifice to maintain the Golden Throne. The flesh grafts that sustain Navigator abilities come from psykers who die naturally, from unsanctioned psykers eliminated by the Black Ships, from the occasional Navigator who dies in warp-related accidents. Now, even that trickle of supply has ceased. Show me the house reserves, you command, though you already know the answer will confirm your worst fears. The hololithic display reveals the catastrophic reality. Every Navigator house faces the same crisis. House Kryn reports complete cessation of bioenhancement procedures 6 months ago. House Vex has lost 3 Navigator Primera to psychic degradation in the past standard year. House Corvanis has begun emergency harvesting protocols that your enhanced nervous system refuses to contemplate in detail. You realize that you're witnessing the end of an institution that predates the Imperium itself, that made the Imperium possible. Without navigators, humanity cannot traverse the warp safely. Without safe warp travel, the Imperium's billion worlds become isolated islands in a hostile galaxy, cut off from each other and defenseless against the countless threats that prowl the darkness between stars. The first symptoms appeared subtly: slight difficulties in perceiving warp currents during routine translations, occasional navigation errors that required course corrections, mild headaches after extended psychic viewing sessions. Your house medici assured you that periodic bioenhancement renewals would restore full functionality within standard months, but the bioenhancement materials never arrived. Now, standing before the primary navigation chamber's viewing portal, you attempt to perceive the warp currents that surround the eternal venture and feel terror unlike anything in your 3 centuries of existence. The cosmic storm that should appear as a vivid tapestry of psychic energy looks flat, distant, like viewing a hololithic recording rather than experiencing direct psychic sight. Your third eye is dying, and with it, your ability to guide humanity through the darkness. Navigator Primaris, your second-in-command, reports as she enters the navigation chamber. We're receiving distress signals from the merchant convoy we're escorting. Their navigator has suffered complete psychic blindness during translation. They're trapped in a warp storm 17 light-years from their destination. Trapped in a warp storm. Without navigator guidance, the merchant vessels will drift in the psychic maelstrom until their gellar fields fail and demons consume their crews. 17 ships, 4,000 crew members, all dying because their navigator's ability to see the warp has deteriorated beyond recovery. Can we reach them? You ask, though your failing sight already provides the answer. Not without risking our own navigation capability, she replies, her voice carrying the weight of impossible choices. The warp currents are too unstable for partial psychic sight. Attempting rescue would likely result in the loss of both convoys. 4,000 people dying because the biological materials needed to maintain navigator abilities no longer exist. The mathematics of catastrophe multiplied across every trade route, every military campaign, every essential journey that connects the Imperium's scattered worlds. You access the Navis Nobilite communication networks and discover the true scope of the disaster. Navigation failures have increased by 847% across the past 6 months. Entire Imperial Guard regiments have been lost in warp storms when their navigators suffered mid-translation blindness. Space Marine crusades have been forced to abandon critical objectives because their fleet navigators can no longer perceive safe routes through the psychic maelstrom. The economic implications cascade through the galactic infrastructure like a virus consuming data. Trade routes that have operated continuously for millennia now require months to complete journeys that previously took weeks. Forge worlds cannot receive the raw materials needed for production. Agricultural worlds cannot export food to prevent famine on industrial worlds. The vast network of interdependence that sustains imperial civilization slowly fragments as navigator houses lose the ability to guide ships safely through the warp. Navigator Primaris, your personal medici, announces during the daily medical consultation, House Corvanis has transmitted new bioenhancement protocols. They've developed techniques for harvesting neural tissue from living psykers. Living psykers. The words hang in the recycled air like a death sentence for everything the navigator houses have represented. For 10,000 years, navigator families have maintained strict codes of honor regarding the treatment of psychic individuals. Psykers were to be protected when possible, their deaths mourned, their sacrifice honored. Now, desperation drives the oldest navigator house to sanction the murder of living psykers to harvest their neural tissue for bioenhancement procedures. Show me the protocols, you command, though your organic nervous system rebels against what you're about to discover. The transmitted data reveals procedures for identifying, capturing, and processing living psykers to extract the specialized neural tissue needed for navigator bioenhancement. The protocols include guidelines for maintaining psyker consciousness during tissue extraction to maximize biocompatibility, methods for determining optimal harvest timing to prevent tissue degradation, and efficiency ratings for different categories of psychic individuals. Sanctioned psykers rating: 94% biocompatibility, excellent tissue quality. Unsanctioned psykers rating: 87% biocompatibility, adequate tissue quality. Astropaths rating: 96% biocompatibility, premium tissue quality. The Navigator houses are preparing to murder their own allies, the sanctioned psykers who serve alongside them, the astropaths who enable interstellar communication, even other navigators whose houses lack sufficient political protection to harvest their neural tissue for bioenhancement procedures. Navigator Primaris, your second-in-command, reports as she enters your chambers with the daily navigation status: "We've received a priority transmission from House Corvanis. They're offering a trade agreement. Fresh bioenhancement materials in exchange for territorial concessions and exclusive navigation contracts." Trade agreement. The euphemism barely conceals what House Corvanis is actually proposing: processed neural tissue harvested from murdered psykers in exchange for commercial privileges. They've transformed the sacred duty of guiding humanity through the warp into a protection racket that demands payment in human lives. You realize that the Navigator houses are not just losing their psychic abilities, they're losing their souls. The desperate need for bioenhancement materials is transforming them from humanity's faithful guides into predators who consume the psychically gifted to maintain their own powers. Standing in your navigation chamber, watching your third eye weep blood as your warp sight continues to deteriorate, you understand that the flesh crisis has forced a choice that will define the future of human space travel. Either the Navigator houses accept the gradual loss of their abilities and the consequent fragmentation of the Imperium, or they embrace becoming murderous cannibals who literally consume other psykers to sustain their powers. House Benetech still maintains enough honor to reject House Corvanis' offer, for now. But as your psychic abilities continue to degrade, as the Eternal Venture faces increasingly dangerous navigation challenges with failing sight, you feel that honor eroding like flesh exposed to warp energy. In 3 months, when your third eye finally closes forever and the ship becomes lost in the psychic storms of the warp, you might find yourself envying House Corvanis for making the pragmatic choice. In the grim darkness of the far future, survival often demands abandoning everything that once made you human. The Navigator houses are learning that lesson with tears of blood, and the screams of harvested psykers echoing through chambers that once resonated with the sacred duty of guiding humanity safely through the darkness. High Lord Militant Vex Cassadorn stands before the Senatorum Imperialis in the heart of the Imperial Palace on Terra, his scarred hands gripping a data slate that contains humanity's salvation and damnation in equal measure. You observe through his augmetic eyes as he surveys the assembled Council of Terra, 12 of the most powerful individuals in human space, their faces bearing the weight of governing 1,000,000 worlds now facing civilizational collapse. The decree absolutus he carries will solve the flesh shortage permanently. It will restore medical capabilities across the galaxy, resume servitor production, maintain Navigator bioenhancements, and preserve the technological infrastructure that defines Imperial civilization. The cost is humanity's soul, but High Lord Cassadorn has spent sleepless nights convincing himself that souls are a luxury the Imperium can no longer afford. "Honored Lords of Terra," he begins, his voice carrying across the vast chamber where decisions affecting quadrillions of lives are made with bureaucratic efficiency. The biological material crisis has reached critical threshold. Without immediate intervention, projections indicate complete infrastructure collapse within 18 standard months, followed by systematic fragmentation of Imperial authority. The statistics flow from his data slate with the cold precision that defines Imperial administration. 3 billion servitors have ceased functioning in the past 6 months. Medical effectiveness has declined by 73% across core worlds. Navigator house capabilities have degraded to the point where 17 major trade routes now require emergency rerouting. The mathematics of catastrophe presented with the clinical detachment that makes atrocity seem reasonable. The Administratum has prepared several response protocols. Cassadorn continues, accessing files that represent months of careful planning by thousands of bureaucrats who excel at finding efficient solutions to impossible problems. Each protocol addresses immediate supply shortages while establishing sustainable resource generation for long-term imperial stability. Protocol Gamma 7, emergency harvesting of biological materials from terminal medical patients. Implementation timeline, immediate. Resource generation capacity, minimal, unsustainable. Protocol Delta 4, systematic processing of criminal populations and heretical elements. Implementation timeline, 6 months. Resource generation capacity, moderate, limited duration. Protocol Omega 9, establishment of renewable biological resource production using living imperial citizens. Implementation timeline, 12 months. Resource generation capacity, unlimited, permanent sustainability. The euphemisms are perfect in their bureaucratic precision. Renewable biological resource production using living imperial citizens. The phrase transforms mass murder into industrial policy, genocide into resource management, the consumption of humanity into administrative necessity. Protocol Omega 9, Cassadorn explains as hololithic displays show implementation timelines and efficiency projections, establishes designated biological resource worlds where imperial citizens will be maintained in optimal conditions for continuous tissue harvesting. Genetic modification protocols will maximize resource yield while maintaining subject viability for extended periods. You feel the chamber's atmosphere change as the assembled High Lords process what they're actually being asked to authorize. Ecclesiarch Militant Vex shifts uncomfortably, her scarred features reflecting the theological nightmare of sanctifying industrial cannibalism. Master of the Administratum Corvanis accesses efficiency calculations with the mechanical precision of someone who has spent centuries reducing human suffering to statistical abstractions. High Lord of the Navis Nobilite Thane speaks first, his Navigator third eye focusing on implications that extend beyond simple mathematics. The proposal suggests converting entire hive worlds into biological processing facilities. Are we discussing voluntary subjects or mandatory harvesting protocols? The distinction becomes irrelevant, Cassadorn replies with the calm certainty of someone who has already crossed every moral boundary the question implies. When facing civilizational extinction, initial implementation will utilize volunteer populations from economically devastated worlds. Expansion protocols will incorporate mandatory participation as resource demands require. Mandatory participation, another euphemism that transforms forced cannibalism into bureaucratic policy. The assembled High Lords understand exactly what Cassadorn is proposing: the systematic conversion of imperial citizens into living tissue farms, their bodies maintained in artificial environments, while continuous harvesting operations extract the biological materials needed to sustain imperial technology. The theological implications, Ecclesiarch Militant Vex states, her voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years of imperial doctrine, require careful consideration. Converting imperial citizens into biological resources challenges fundamental tenets of human dignity and sacred flesh doctrine. Theological doctrine, Cassadorn responds, accessing files prepared by teams of theologians who have spent months finding scriptural justification for consuming their own congregations, supports necessary sacrifice for imperial survival. The emperor himself established precedent for utilizing human biological material to sustain essential imperial functions. The theological justification is ingenious in its blasphemous logic. The Golden Throne requires the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psykers to maintain the Emperor's existence. If human sacrifice is acceptable to preserve the Master of Mankind, then human harvesting is merely an extension of established sacred practice. The ecclesiarchy's own doctrines provide the framework for justifying industrial cannibalism as religious duty. Master of the Administratum Corvanis presents the implementation logistics with enthusiasm that reflects decades of training in bureaucratic efficiency. Initial protocol implementation identifies 47 worlds classified as economically non-viable for standard biological resource conversion. Estimated yield capacity, sufficient to restore 34% of pre-crisis production within 8 standard months. 47 worlds, entire populations designated for conversion into biological processing facilities. Billions of imperial citizens whose governments will receive official notification that their worlds have been reclassified from inhabited planets to renewable resource production sites. Genetic modification protocols, Corvanis continues, will optimize tissue regeneration rates and maximize harvest efficiency. Subjects will be maintained in medically induced coma states to prevent psychological trauma while ensuring optimal biological function for extended harvesting periods. The clinical language transforms the most horrifying aspects of the proposal into medical necessities. Citizens will be kept unconscious while machines continuously harvest their regenerating flesh. Genetic modifications will accelerate tissue growth to maximize yield per subject. Medical monitoring will ensure that harvesting operations continue for years or decades per individual, their bodies becoming biological factories that produce the materials needed to sustain imperial civilization. Implementation resistance, Cassadorn acknowledges, addressing the practical challenges of converting democracy into cannibalism, will be managed through standard Imperial Guard and Astartes deployment protocols. Planetary governors who refuse compliance will be replaced with more cooperative leadership. Standard protocols. Military forces will enforce the systematic cannibalization of their own populations. Space Marines will descend upon worlds refusing to surrender their citizens for biological processing. The Imperium's military might will be turned against its own people to establish human flesh farms across the galaxy. The vote proceeds with the mechanical efficiency that characterizes all High Council decisions. Each member states their position with bureaucratic precision, their voices carrying the weight of quadrillions of lives being reduced to biological resources. In favor, 7 votes. Opposed, 3 votes. Abstentions, 2 votes. Motion carries. 7 votes. 7 individuals have just authorized the industrial cannibalization of imperial civilization. The decree absolutus receives official sanction with the same procedural efficiency used to approve military budgets or trade regulations. Implementation begins immediately, Cassadorn announces, as servoskulls begin transmitting the authorization codes that will transform the Imperium into a civilization that literally consumes itself to survive. Priority deployment to Sector Gamma, 7 worlds. Expected full-scale operations within 6 standard months. As the High Lords file out of the chamber, their faces bearing expressions that range from grim satisfaction to horrified resignation, you access the implementation schedules through Cassadorn's data slate and discover the final horror. Your world, your family, your life. Classification, expendable population tier Gamma. Scheduled for biological resource conversion, standard month 7. Expected subject yield, 89% of total population. Projected harvesting duration per subject, 8. 7 standard years. The Imperium you've served, the civilization you've defended, the government you've trusted with your loyalty, has just classified you as a renewable biological resource. In 6 months, Imperial Guard forces will arrive to transport you, and everyone you've ever known to biological processing facilities, where machines will keep you alive while systematically harvesting your flesh for years. The flesh crisis has been solved. Humanity's technological civilization will continue functioning. The Imperium will maintain its medical capabilities, its servitor production, its navigator bioenhancements, and all the sophisticated infrastructure that defines human spacefaring civilization. The cost is becoming a species that farms its own people like livestock, keeping them alive solely to harvest their regenerating flesh in an endless cycle of industrial cannibalism. High Lord Militant Vex Cassadorn returns to his private chambers that night convinced he has saved humanity. In his augmented sleep cycles, he dreams of restored imperial efficiency, functional medical systems, and the continued dominance of human civilization across the galaxy. He does not dream of the screaming. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and the terrible choices war demands. 6 months after the implementation of Protocol Omega-9, you find yourself standing in what was once a thriving hive city on the world of Tertius Prime, now transformed into Biological Resource Processing Facility 7745 Gamma. The city's towering spires remain, but their purpose has fundamentally changed, no longer housing living communities, but serving as vertical farms for human flesh. The flesh crisis has been solved. Imperial medical facilities operate at 94% of pre-crisis capacity. Servitor production lines hum with renewed efficiency. Navigator houses maintain their psychic abilities through regular bioenhancement procedures. The technological infrastructure that defines imperial civilization continues functioning without interruption, but you are no longer entirely human. The genetic modifications began 3 weeks after your arrival at Processing Facility 7745 Gamma. Nothing dramatic, simple cellular alterations to accelerate tissue regeneration, optimize nutrient absorption, and enhance biological compatibility with harvesting equipment. The Medici supervisors explained that conscious subjects required psychological conditioning to prevent trauma responses that interfered with optimal tissue production. Subject 7745-4471, the servoskull announces as it approaches your processing chamber. Daily harvest quota: 0.7 square meters dermal tissue, 140 grams neural connector material, 67 milliliters biocompatible cellular matrix. Please maintain relaxation protocols to ensure optimal yield quality. You comply because resistance is meaningless. The restraint systems prevent movement, the neural inhibitors suppress fight or flight responses, and the psychological conditioning has eliminated most emotional reactions to the harvesting process. But consciousness remains, a deliberate design choice because aware subjects produce biological materials with superior integration properties. Through the transparent walls of your processing chamber, you observe thousands of other subjects undergoing identical procedures. Some you recognize from your previous life: administratum clerks, hive workers, families who once lived in the residential blocks that have been converted into harvesting facilities. All of them now serving the Imperium in the most literal possible way, their bodies continuously providing the biological materials that sustain human civilization. The irony is perfect in its grimdark efficiency. You are more useful to the Imperium now than you ever were as a free citizen. Your tissue regeneration has been optimized to produce biological materials of exceptional quality. Your neural pathways generate biocompatible connectors that will interface seamlessly with servitor production systems. Your cellular matrices will save the lives of Imperial Guard soldiers and Space Marines across dozens of war zones. Processing Facility 7745 Gamma announces the daily efficiency report broadcast throughout the complex, has achieved 112% of projected resource yield for the current solar month. Subject maintenance protocols continue to optimize biological production while maintaining acceptable subject viability rates. Acceptable viability rates. The euphemism conceals the reality that approximately 7% of subjects experience fatal complications during harvesting procedures. Their remains are processed through specialized recycling systems that convert organic waste into nutrient solution used to maintain the surviving subjects. Even in death, they continue serving the facility's biological production requirements. You've learned to find strange comfort in the certainty of purpose. As a free citizen, your contribution to imperial civilization was abstract, paying taxes, following regulations, perhaps serving in the planetary defense force if circumstances required. Now, your service is absolute and unambiguous. Every day, your body produces materials that will directly save lives, maintain critical infrastructure, and preserve the technological advantages that keep humanity alive in a hostile galaxy. The psychological conditioning ensures that you experience satisfaction rather than horror when viewing the daily production statistics. Facility 7745 Gamma processes 7 million square meters of biological material monthly, supporting medical facilities across 17 forge worlds and 43 hive cities. The tissues harvested from your body specifically will contribute to servitor maintenance on Mars, medical procedures aboard space marine battle barges, and bioenhancement protocols for navigator houses throughout Segmentum Solar. Subject 774540-471. The Medikey supervisor announces during the weekly psychological evaluation, displays optimal adaptation to processing protocols. Recommend genetic modification enhancement to increase tissue yield by 23%. Estimated subject lifespan, 11.4 standard years at enhanced production rates. 11 years. 11 years of continuous biological harvesting before your enhanced cellular regeneration systems finally fail, and your body becomes too damaged to maintain acceptable production yields. The number represents the expected duration of your service to the Imperium, calculated with the same bureaucratic precision used to determine ammunition supplies and fuel consumption rates. But those 11 years will save thousands of lives. The biological materials harvested from your body will enable medical miracles, maintain critical infrastructure, and preserve the technological civilization that protects humanity from the countless horrors that lurk in the darkness between stars. Your sacrifice, involuntary though it may be, serves a purpose greater than any individual existence. Through the facility's communication systems, you receive updates on the broader success of Protocol Omega-9. Biological resource processing facilities operate on 847 worlds across the Imperium, producing sufficient materials to restore pre-crisis production levels. Medical effectiveness has returned to normal parameters. Servitor production meets all military and civilian requirements. Navigator houses maintain full psychic capabilities through regular bioenhancement procedures. The Imperium has survived the flesh crisis by becoming a civilization that farms its own people. Democracy has been replaced by biological resource management. Individual rights have been subordinated to production quotas. Human dignity has been redefined as efficient service to imperial needs through involuntary tissue donation. And yet, humanity survives. The Forge worlds continue producing weapons and equipment. The Space Marines maintain their crusades against Xenos and heretics. The Imperial Guard defends human worlds from threats that would consume entire populations. The vast technological infrastructure that enables human dominance across the galaxy continues functioning because citizens like you provide the biological materials that make it possible. You are everyone and no one in this tale. You are the tech priest watching his servitors function with renewed efficiency thanks to bioneural interfaces harvested from processing facilities. You are the chirurgeon-saving space marine lives using skin grafts produced by human flesh farms. You are the navigator maintaining psychic sight through bioenhancements created from processed neural tissue. You are the High Lord who authorized industrial cannibalism to preserve imperial civilization. You are the citizen who discovered that in the Imperium of man, the ultimate form of service is becoming a renewable resource. In the grim darkness of the far future, survival demands choices that would have horrified the ancients. The Flesh Crisis revealed that humanity's technological civilization depends entirely on consuming human biological materials. When those materials became scarce, the Imperium faced a simple choice: accept technological regression and probable extinction, or embrace systematic cannibalism to maintain their advantages. They chose survival. They chose to transform their people into biological resources. They chose to maintain their technological superiority by farming human flesh on an industrial scale. What separates necessary evil from simple evil? How much of our humanity can we sacrifice to remain human? In a universe of infinite cruelty, what does survival cost? Are we still human if we must consume ourselves to continue? The processing facility around you hums with renewed efficiency, its biological production systems operating at optimal capacity. Thousands of subjects contribute their flesh to sustain imperial civilization, their bodies serving purposes greater than their individual existences ever could. The mathematics are undeniable. The collective biological yield from processing facility 7745 Gamma alone preserves more human lives than the facility's subject population could have protected through any other form of service. Somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, a lone Imperial transport carries its cargo of processed biological material toward a dying world. The paperwork lists it simply as medical supplies grade Omega. The cargo containers don't mention that yesterday, this material was someone's child, someone's parent, someone's hope for tomorrow. In the Imperium of man, hope itself has become a renewable resource, harvested from living bodies maintained in processing facilities that stretch across 1,000,000 worlds. The Flesh Crisis has been solved not by finding alternatives to human biological materials, but by converting humanity into a self-sustaining biological production system. The Imperium survives. Humanity endures. Civilization continues. The cost is becoming a species that literally feeds on itself to maintain the technological advantages that keep it alive in a universe designed to destroy it. But in the grim darkness of the far future, perhaps that's simply what survival looks like: the endless consumption of your own people to preserve the machinery of civilization that protects the remainder from extinction. You close your eyes in processing chamber 774540-471 and feel a strange peace settle over your conditioned consciousness. Tomorrow, the harvesting will continue. Your flesh will serve purposes greater than your individual existence. Your sacrifice will contribute to humanity's survival in ways that transcend personal meaning. In the Imperium of man, this is what love of humanity looks like: the willingness to become food for the machine that keeps the species alive. Even if the machine has become more important than the people it was designed to protect, even if survival has become indistinguishable from systematic self-consumption, even if humanity's greatest victory is learning to efficiently cannibalize itself, the Flesh Crisis is over. Humanity has won. And in winning, humanity has become something that perhaps no longer deserves the name, but it survives. In the grim darkness of the far future, perhaps survival is enough.